Hey, it's Eric Johnson, the brand.
Aaron Thigpen, the source.
Our topic today, Aaron, is something that's hot and heavy that you and I talk about a lot, and it's the big mystery for me. I love to really dive into this, and the topic is, how does a player take their cage swing to the game? How do we translate that? A lot of times, players have trouble taking all that work that they spend in the cages or out in the field in practice, and how to translate that into a game and make it work.
I think it's a great subject. Obviously, I'm not a hitting coach, so the only way I can relate to this is in track and field, we used to have what we call workout kings. Guys who could do the workouts, would lead every rep. And,
Right.
But when it came race day, something was missing. And in track and field, I think it was more of a mental block. I don't think it was an execution block. Obviously, your mental block affects your execution, but for some reason, these athletes had some kind of emotional reaction to competition that maybe hindered their performance. And I can only assume that may be the same thing that's going on in the scenario for the hitter, because if they're executing in the cage,
Right.
well, it's the only thing that's not in that environment is maybe that pressure of the competition. And so maybe where I'd look at first is, how is that athlete responding to competition? What's their emotional, mental makeup in that regard? I mean, there can be some technical things, but I would look at that first.
You know, I like what you said there, that mental block, because I think, teaching hitting as long as I have and talking to hitters at all levels, whether it's a youth hitter or a high school player or a collegiate athlete to the professional hitter, and the mental side it always comes back to that at every level. And there are mental blocks that players have. One is they don't know how to handle failure. Like they're afraid to succeed, a lot of times. That's one thing. Second thing is, players have ability to be comfortable. I'm comfortable in the cage, I get in the game, I don't quite feel comfortable. And this is the most interesting thing as we watch the playoffs and these guys are making their debuts. You have players that just got out of college or never been to spring training, and they're making their professional debuts, and they're doing it in this sterile environment, no fans.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, this week, we have 15,000 fans in this, and they're making their debut. It's a little bit different. It's not the same thing now where there's no environment. So how they deal with the surrounding things around them in the game versus the cage is very sterile. And I think a lot of times the athletes get into that position. The other thing, Aaron, I think is important is players don't have a routine. I think they go in the cage and they hit, take a lot of swings and great. They get in the game, all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm hitting and I fouled a ball off and the umpire says, get in the batter's box. Or they're like, oh, I'm going too fast. They're not breathing correctly. Their nerves have kicked in where their heart is beating really fast, and players don't know how to slow down that process.
And that kind of goes to what I teach my athletes, my track and field athletes, is you practice how you compete. So that way there's not really a difference. You just got more external stimuli in terms of the crowds and that sort of thing. But again, you talk about rituals and having a plan and a process for doing things. And I think if you do that in your practice scenario, it's easier to capture that in the competition scenario. The other thing I also caution my athletes with is they try to do something different. And I warn them against, don't try to do anything different and don't try to do more.
Gotcha.
Athletes tend to, when they get in the competition, I think, tend to try and do more. And that more always takes them out of the sweet spot. And for me, I talk a lot to my athletes a lot about knowing where your sweet spot is. And once you know it and you find it, you stay there, regardless of anything else that's going around you. Just let the chips fall where they may.
Now, I have a question for you with that, because I think that's interesting. So when you find your sweet spot, when you're training in that scenario, practice scenario, you're at that sweet spot, right? Mm-hmm. Then when you get in competition, you're trying to get to that same sweet spot you had when you were practicing, right? And I think that's crucial. It's interesting to me that you say that, because a lot of athletes have trouble understanding what their sweet spot is.
Right. Well, and that's why you have to train yourself to find it so that you can recognize it. Mm-hmm. And that's why you have to be engaged in your training and your practices, and you have to be cognizant of what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve in those practices, so that way you recognize it when you're there. I mean, again, my own personal experience.
Right.
It wasn't about having the abilities, not having the abilities. No, it wasn't about not having the technical abilities. It was more about realizing when I was there and not trying to do anything more.
Do you think athletes have trouble finding when they're there, when they're training? I mean, you can see it. You look.
They're there. Right. They have a problem because the coaches don't point it out, and they have a problem because the coaches don't know what the sweet spot is.
I like that there.
So how many times, will an athlete hit, say, 20 balls off a tee?
Right.
And they'll have that one where just, bow, everything's there.
Right.
And the coach just goes on to the next rep.
Without stopping
and that's what I'm saying.
Recognizing
that's where you stop an athlete and say, hey, stop.
Right.
And my process is, I say, stop. What did you do right there? What did you feel? What were you thinking? Close your eyes and go through that. And make them articulate it. And as they do that more and more, they know what a perfect swing for them looks like, feels like, how it should flow through their body.
Right.
Then, once they recognize that, then they can learn how to recapture it. It's like, hey, how can you describe what, I don't know, a Picasso painting looks like if you've never seen one?
Right.
Yeah. You got to show them one first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And they've got to absorb it. They got to take in the colors and the brush strokes and all of that. And that mental connection to that kinetic the movements and things that you're doing now becomes meshed together. It's bridged together. Mm-hmm. So again, your coaching should be teaching and recognizing, helping an athlete recognize when they're at optimal performance, because that's what we want. And performing is being able to recall. Your best athletes are able to recall optimal performance on command.
So true.
Regardless of sport.
Right.
So that's the holy grail that I try and get athletes to.
We do the same thing, Aaron. I mean, it's so fun. I hear you say that, and you and I've been training athletes together for so long. And that sweet spot, we're not into 1,000 repetitions. Yeah. I'm into a quality repetition. I'd rather for a hitter take 15 quality swings, stopping, recognizing how they feel, what they were smelling, what the sense of the sound. I want their senses to be heightened during that time. So when we get into the game, they know what that feels like. And no matter what the circumstances are outside of their world, that they can have that sensory acuteness to recall that. So when they get in competition, it can flow.
Right. And that's it. I mean, you've heard it used so many different ways, flow state, finding the groove, whatever it is. There's this mental connection that has to happen with the physical body.
Right.
That allows you to do that. And you're not going to do that without knowing and practicing it. It's like anything else. It's a skill that you attain. I mean, that maybe innately some of us get some degree of it on our own, just blessed with it. But I think a lot of it has to do with your approach to training. I think it is a skill that can be taught.
I agree with you. It's a skill that can be taught. As I've taught personally over these years, I just slowed down that process with players to get them to repeat the action. There are times where I want players to get a lot of repetition because I'm trying to get them to feel a certain feeling at that time in a certain fundamental. But when we get down to, okay, we have to take this to the game. What is our routine? And when they hit one in the routine, what that feel like? And I want that player to communicate that to me in their words, not in my words, in their words, because they are hitting in the game. And they have to understand where that sweet spot, like you mentioned, is in training, which they can take it to the game, where it just gets, into that process of flowing, and I think that's so important.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think making that transition from practice, cage hitting to live, it has to be done.
Yeah. It has to be done, Aaron, and I think it's just a matter of recognizing what the player is doing and slowing down that process rather than speeding it up.
Good way to end it.
All right, people. Until next time, it's Coach EJ, the brand.
And Coach Aaron Thigpen, the source. Look for our Facebook Live events. They'll be starting soon. Check our Facebook page. Love for your input and your participation. And we'll see you soon.
See you later.